Death at Rottingdean. Chapter 9. When all the world would keep a matter hid, since truth is seldom friend to any crowd, men write in fable as old Aesop did, jesting at that which none will name aloud. Rudyard Kipling, The Fabulists. Now, it could be argued that Patrick should not have carried a message for a man he believed to be involved in another man's death, but he was only a boy with a boy's judgment and a boy's ordinary need for a man's affection and approval. So he took the coin, pocketed his reservations, and hurried off to the White Horse, where the coffin, as the odorous old coach was known, was about to begin its afternoon run to Brighton. He begged a ride from old Hennessy, whose Jack Russell Terrier shared the box with them, barking like a banshee at every passing vehicle. Patrick thus went in fine style as far as the coach terminus on Madeira Drive, then caught a ride on a passing omnibus when the conductor was distracted by an old woman with several large parcels and a parrot. As the bus passed Queen's Road, he hopped off and walked the rest of the way to Burke and Sons Tobacconists in Church Road, Hove. A pleasant walk on the bright, crisp Monday afternoon. He found Mr. Morris Burke, a grey-faced, hunched-backed little man at work behind the counter. "Not available, did he say?" Mr. Burke asked with a frown when he had delivered his message. "Perhaps in a few weeks," Patrick repeated. "Altogether unacceptable," Mr. Burke said. He scowled at Patrick. "Did he say why?" Patrick shook his head. "No, sir, just that it's not available." "Well, tell him I says I expect I'll locate another," Mr. Burke growled. "And the sooner the better, I says." For Patrick's trouble, he gave him 2 Turkish cigarettes out of an orange cardboard box on the counter and pushed him out the door. Patrick would rather have had money, but the cigarettes were an acceptable substitute, and he smoked as he sauntered in a leisurely manner eastward along the bustling sea front, glad to have his errand done with. He might have thought about what the message meant and how it was related to the Coast Guard's death, but he put those thoughts aside and stopped to listen to an organ grinder with a red-headed monkey rattling his chain, then loafed along in front of the imposing steel frame of the new Palace Pier, his hands in his pockets, whistling a beer hall tune. Had anyone looked attentively at him, they would have seen only a thin young boy with curly red hair, dressed in a knit jersey with 2 short sleeves, red suspenders, brown corduroy trousers, truant from his employment, and out on an afternoon's lark. Patrick's own view of himself, however, was rather more fabulous. He was, by turns, a daring pirate from Treasure Island, enjoying shore leave before taking to the high seas for more raids on rich merchant ships. Then he was Mr. Kipling's Mowgli, master of the jungle, gliding through a twilit thicket of trees with the rock python car draped in a friendly fashion across his shoulders. And then he was the smuggler, carrying a tub of the finest French brandy through the tunnels under Rottingdean's High Street to "Look where you're walking, boy!" A voice shrilled, and Patrick, called to reality, jumped back to smartly avoid being struck by a wheeled chair in which sat a wizened old man, bundled up in an overcoat propelled by a sullen male attendant wearing a checked suit and a bowler hat. He did not jump back soon enough to avoid the old man's ebony cane, however, which dealt him a numbing blow on his arm. He hopped up and down, cursing and rubbing his arm as the old man rolled on through the crowd, giggling hysterically and poking his cane at pink-faced nurses with babies in prams and fat wives with paper-wrapped packets of fish. But Patrick's pain was short-lived, and he was soon whistling again. It was getting on to tea time, and he stopped at a street vendor's cart to buy 3 fresh oysters for a penny, and a little further on, finding himself still hungry, a baked potato and a tin cup full of steaming China tea. He was tempted by the ginger beer stand, with its polished mahogany frame and bright gold taps, but held firmly to the last of his coins, which he still had in his pocket when he arrived at the electric railway's jetty at the Banjo Groin. The coast road to Rottingdean was only 3 miles long, but he was tired and would far rather ride than walk, if it could be managed without a cost. 20 minutes later, he had smuggled himself aboard the Pioneer in the company of a man and woman with such a large flock of children that the conductor could not be bothered to even count them. Once on board, he climbed the stairs to the open deck on top of the salon for a better view of the cliffs and the channel and the seagulls clamoring overhead. Locally, the Pioneer was called Daddy Longlegs, for it was built on 24 stilts so that it could make the journey in the high tide as well as low. An ungainly affair, it looked like a cross between a well-appointed railway carriage and a pleasure steamer topped with a pilot house, and one of Jules Verne's flights of fancy. For Patrick, the trip of the electric railway was the perfect end to an altogether satisfactory day, and by the time he disembarked from the Pioneer in the voluminous shelter of a woman's skirts, he had already forgotten his anxiety of the morning. He climbed the steps to the quarter-deck and made his way up High Street past the White Horse Inn and the Black Horse Pub, and then sharply left as if he were going to the stables. Instead, he took the path up to Beacon Hill. The black tarred smock windmill that stood at the brow of the hill overlooking the channel had long since ceased to grind corn, and the canvas of its sails had disappeared before Patrick was even born. Few people came up here except on occasions when the village beacon fire was lit, such as Her Majesty's Jubilee just a few months before. That had been a night Patrick would remember for the rest of his life, capping a day of parades and prayers and feasting that ended with the whole village gathering around the beacon fire, with answering fires ablaze from hilltops all up and down the sea-coast, and flares sent up from ships far out on the channel, and fireworks, and the Brighton military band playing at the Queen's Park. Indeed, such were the celebrations all around the globe that it was unlikely that any of the Queen's subjects anywhere in her empire would forget where they were on that particular night in 1897. But Beacon Hill was dark and silent now, and the windmill was the same shadowy secret place it had been for the past 50 years. According to local legend, it had been much used by smugglers who employed the mill proper to store the booty and the sails, which carried their canvas then and could be turned by hand to send messages to ships waiting in the channel. Now that no one used it, no one but Patrick and the pigeons that roosted up high, and the field mice that found it very warm and dry place for the winter. And since local legend also had it that the mill was haunted by the ghost of a smuggler who had been hanged there many years before, no one was very likely to use it, which suited Patrick just perfectly, and made it a fine hideaway for his precious cache of secretly saved coin. But still, despite its usefulness to Patrick, the mill was a gloomy place at twilight, and he felt, as he always did, a shiver of apprehension as he entered. Outside, the sea shone with pearly luminescence that signaled a gathering storm. Inside, it was dusky and quiet, except for the low moan of the wind in the bare sail frames and the faint squeaking of the main shaft, which still turned as the sails turned. Although the millstone and the spur wheel dismantled lay against a stone foundation. Indeed, it was so dark within that Patrick reached up above the low door and took down a stub of candle and a match fetched from Mrs. Hicks's cupboard. He lit it, striking the match against stone and shielding the flickering flame from the cold wind that came through the open door. He turned to go on to his cache, which was concealed behind a loose stone. Then he saw it, and his breath froze in his throat. A man was sitting upright, legs stretched out, his back against one of the ancient grinding wheels that had been tilted up along the opposite wall. He was staring accusingly at Patrick, his eyes pale like glass balls in a face as white as marble, his mouth open as if to charge Patrick with some horrible crime. But the man could no longer accuse anyone of anything. There was a small round hole in the front of his brass-buttoned Coast Guard jacket, and the wool was sodden with congealed blood. He was quite dead.